The interview was supposed to save Tess Gray's life. 6-figure salary, comprehensive benefits, the only chance to pay her mother's $340,000 medical debt before the collectors destroyed everything. Instead, she walked into the corner office and found Jax Rourke, the man she'd confronted at a nightclub 12 hours earlier, the stranger she'd publicly accused of arrogant entitlement, and now the CEO who controlled whether she ate next month or drowned in the debt that had been crushing her family for 3 years. But to understand how a woman desperate enough to work 90-hour weeks across 3 jobs ended up publicly challenging one of New York's most powerful men, you had to go back to the night before, to the moment Tess Gray promised herself she would not confront anyone, a promise that lasted exactly 7 minutes. But this wasn't even the most shocking part. The club in downtown Manhattan had been packed wall to wall, bass shaking the floor hard enough to rattle teeth, and Tess had been trying to forget job applications and mounting family obligations for just one night. Then she'd seen him tall and lethal in a charcoal suit, ice blue eyes scanning the room like he owned every inch of it, standing directly in a server's path while his spilled drink soaked her sleeve. The server had apologized. The man hadn't. And Tess, fueled by 3 months of desperation and a sense of justice that had always overridden her self-preservation, had crossed the floor in 6 strides to tell the stranger exactly what she thought of men who treated people like garbage. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. She'd called him arrogant. She'd called him entitled. She'd told him that money didn't exempt anyone from basic human decency. And Jax Rourke, though she hadn't known his name then, had looked at her with those ice blue eyes and said 5 words that should have been a warning. "You have 5 seconds to walk away." Sweetheart, she hadn't walked away. She'd doubled down, challenged him, fought him on every dismissive word until he'd turned and left her standing there, furious and humiliated and certain she'd never see the arrogant brute again. 12 hours later, standing in his corner office with her resume clutched in sweaty hands, and her entire future balanced on whether he'd hire her or destroy her, Tess realized exactly how catastrophically wrong she'd been. If you've ever stood up to someone powerful and faced the consequences, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button right now and comment where you're watching from. We're building a family of people who refuse to back down, no matter the cost. Tess had 3 options: apologize, flee, or pretend last night never happened. She chose option 4. Sit down and fight for the job anyway. His next decision would decide whether he lived or died. Mr. Rourke. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She moved to the chair across from his massive desk, set her folder down with controlled precision, and met his eyes. "Thank you for the opportunity to interview." Interview. Jax moved to his desk, every motion controlled, predatory. He didn't sit, just stood there, studying her like she was a problem he was deciding how to solve. "Is that what we're calling this?" "That's what it says in my appointment confirmation email." Jax picked up a file from his desk, her file. She realized. Her resume, her background check, everything she'd submitted through the hiring agency. Tess Gray, 26, MBA from Columbia, 3 years at Morrison & Associates as a senior analyst. Stellar references, impeccable credentials. He looked up. And apparently, a habit of picking fights with men in nightclubs. Someone in the room was lying, but who? Tess's jaw tightened. That was a mistake? Jax's eyebrow lifted. Or do you make a regular practice of lecturing strangers about their character flaws? Only when those strangers are treating service staff like they're disposable. Tess shot back before she could stop herself. The corner of Jax's mouth twitched. There it is, that fire. He set the file down. "Tell me, Miss Gray, do you think that attitude is going to serve you well working for me?" "I think," Tess said carefully, "that my qualifications speak for themselves. My personal opinions about," she hesitated, "about last night are irrelevant to my professional capabilities. There was one detail everyone missed." "Are they?" Jax finally sat, leaning back in his chair with the kind of casual power that made it clear who controlled this room. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've already demonstrated a severe lack of judgment. You confronted a man you didn't know, in a situation you didn't understand, based on assumptions you couldn't verify." You saw what you wanted to see," Jax interrupted, his voice going cold. "The server you defended? She's my cousin. The spill was intentional. She was signaling security about a situation developing in the VIP section. Your dramatic intervention almost compromised an ongoing security operation." Tess's stomach dropped. "I what? You didn't know?" Jax's smile was sharp, humorless. "Of course you didn't. Because you made assumptions based on limited information and self-righteous indignation. That's called poor judgment, Miss Gray. And poor judgment gets people hurt in my world." In that moment, The entire balance of power flipped. I was trying to help. You were trying to be a hero. Jax leaned forward. Heroes are liability. They act on impulse instead of information. They prioritize feeling right over being effective. And they create chaos in situations that require control. Tess wanted to argue, wanted to defend herself. But his words hit harder than she wanted to admit, because part of her knew he was right. She had made assumptions. She had acted on impulse. She just hated that he was the one pointing it out. So what now? Tess asked quietly. You brought me here to humiliate me? To prove I'm unqualified? What followed next was completely unexpected. No, Jack stood, moving to the windows. I brought you here because despite your catastrophic lack of judgment last night, your professional record is exceptional. Morrison and Associates doesn't give stellar references lightly. Your analytics work on the Castellano merger saved them millions. And I need someone with exactly your skill set. Tess blinked. You're offering me the job? I'm considering it. Jax turned back to face her. But understand this, Miss Gray, if you work for me, you follow my protocols. You don't question my decisions in public. You don't make assumptions. And you absolutely do not let your personal feelings override professional judgment. Clear? It should have been insulting. Should have made her stand up and walk out. But the salary was 6 figures. The benefits were comprehensive. And her mother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves. Clear, Tess said. Good. Jax returned to his desk. You start Monday, 8 a.m. Don't be late. He was dismissing her. Just like that. He didn't realize this moment would come back to haunt him. Tess stood, gathering her folder. She made it to the door before her pride overrode her common sense. Mr. Rourke? He looked up, expression neutral. For the record, Tess said, I still think you were rude last night, even if the situation wasn't what I thought. Jax's eyes darkened. Noted. Anything else? No, sir. Then I'll see you Monday, Miss Gray. Try not to pick any fights between now and then. Tess left before she said something that would get her fired before she even started. But as the elevator descended, carrying her away from the corner office and the most infuriating man she'd ever met, one thought crystallized with absolute clarity. Working for Jax Rourke was going to be the longest, most miserable experience of her professional life. She just didn't know yet how right she was. This was only the beginning of a much bigger war. Tess arrived at Rourke Global at 7:45 a.m. on Monday, 15 minutes early and armed with a leather portfolio that contained 3 months of research on every active deal, every pending contract, and every operational vulnerability she could identify. If Jax Rourke wanted perfection, she'd give him flawless execution so precise, he'd have no choice but to respect her competency, even if he hated her personally. The executive assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Caroline who'd clearly been briefed on the new chief of staff, directed Tess to her office. Not a cubicle, an actual office with glass walls directly adjacent to Jax's corner suite, positioned so he could see her at all times and she could see him. Psychological warfare disguised as office planning. But what he discovered next changed everything. Mr. Rourke likes to keep his senior staff close, Caroline said with a smile that suggested she knew exactly how uncomfortable this arrangement was. He'll brief you at 8 sharp. Coffee? Black, please. Smart choice. He hates waiting. Tess spent the next 10 minutes setting up her workspace with military precision. Laptop positioned at the perfect angle, files organized by priority, notepad, and 3 pens aligned on the desk. When Jax's door opened at exactly 8 a.m., she was already standing, portfolio in hand, expression neutral. Miss Gray. Jax's eyes swept over her tailored navy suit and pulled back hair, assessing. Punctual. Good start. I don't believe in wasting time, Mr. Rourke. Neither do I. He gestured toward his office. Let's see if that's still true in 3 hours. From here on, the rules of the game changed. The briefing was brutal. Jax rattled off 15 active projects, each with complex moving parts, contradictory stakeholder demands, and impossible deadlines. He didn't slow down, didn't repeat himself, and definitely didn't check if she was keeping up. This was a test, and they both knew it. Tess took notes in shorthand, her hand flying across the page, her mind organizing information into hierarchical structures even as he spoke. When he finally paused, she looked up and said, The Castellano deal has a gap in the environmental compliance section. Page 47 of the contract. The language is vague enough that it could trigger a regulatory review that would delay closing by 6 weeks. Jax's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. You read the Castellano contract? All 212 pages. This weekend. Tess flipped to a marked section in her notes. The Singapore project has a similar issue with the tax structuring, and the Moretti acquisition needs revised termination language or you're exposed to a lawsuit if the deal falls through. He knew something that no one else in the building did. You reviewed all 15 projects? You hired me to be competent, Mr. Rourke, not decorative. Tess met his eyes. I assume you want actual analysis, not just administrative support. For a long moment, Jax just stared at her. Then he picked up his phone and pressed a button. Caroline, get legal on the line. I need revised language for Castellano, Singapore, and Moretti. Priority 1. He disconnected and turned back to Tess. Anything else? The Milan meeting scheduled for Thursday conflicts with the board presentation. You'll need to move one or delegate. I don't delegate board presentations. Then move Milan to Friday morning. The time zone difference means you'll still catch their business day if you start at 6 a.m. our time. Jax's jaw tightened slightly. I don't take meetings at 6 a.m. You do now, Tess said calmly. Or you miss the Milan window entirely and risk losing the contract to Bergstrom Industries, who are already circling. That moment, everything in the room changed. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Jax leaned back in his chair, his eyes going cold and assessing. You've been here less than an hour, and you're already rearranging my schedule and correcting my contracts. You hired me to make your operations more efficient. That's what I'm doing. Tess kept her voice steady, professional. If you'd prefer someone who just nods and agrees with everything you say, I can recommend several qualified candidates. What I'd prefer, Jax said quietly, dangerously, is an employee who understands the difference between competence and insubordination. There's no insubordination in pointing out factual errors, Mr. Rourke, just professional diligence. They stared at each other across the desk, the air between them crackling with tension that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the nightclub argument neither of them had forgotten. Tess could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing her value against his irritation, deciding whether to fire her or leverage her skill set. For the first time, he wasn't in control. Finally, Jax stood. Move the Milan meeting, fix the contracts, and schedule a full operations review for tomorrow at 7 a.m. 7 a.m. isn't on your plan. It is now, Jax interrupted, his voice sharp. If you're going to reorganize my schedule, Miss Gray, you're going to be present for every minute of the chaos you create. Dismissed. Tess left his office with her spine straight and her expression neutral, but her hands were shaking slightly as she sat down at her desk. Through the glass wall, she could see Jax on the phone, his posture rigid, his free hand gripping the edge of his desk like he was physically restraining himself from something. But there was one thing he didn't know about his closest ally. Wow. The voice came from her doorway. Tess looked up to find a tall man in his early 30s, wearing an expensive suit and an amused expression. You just survived a Jax Rourke briefing without crying, apologizing, or quitting. I'm impressed. And you are? Pierce Donovan, Senior VP of Acquisitions. He extended his hand. Office veteran, professional survivor, and the guy who's going to warn you that what you just did, correcting him in his own office on your first day, is either brilliantly strategic or professionally suicidal. Tess shook his hand. Which do you think it is? Haven't decided yet. Pierce glanced toward Jax's office, where the man in question was now pacing while still on the phone, his movements controlled but aggressive. But I've worked here for 5 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he's looking at you right now. He's furious. He's something, Pierce agreed. Fury, definitely. But also, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Jax doesn't waste energy on people who don't matter. The last 3 chiefs of staff lasted an average of 4 months before he either fired them or they quit. You just challenged him in the first hour and he didn't throw you out. That's not fury, Tess, that's interest. And suddenly, he realized he was being played. Interest in firing me later instead of immediately? Interest in figuring out if you're actually as competent as you're pretending to be. Pierce smiled. Word of advice? He's going to test you. Constantly. Impossible deadlines. Contradictory instructions. Situations designed to make you fail. If you survive, you'll be the most valuable person in this building. If you don't, I'll be gone in 4 months like everyone else. Exactly. Pierce straightened. Welcome to Rourke Global, Tess. Try not to let him destroy you before you've had a chance to prove yourself. After Pierce left, Tess pulled up her calendar and started executing the changes she'd proposed. Milan rescheduled to Friday at 6 a.m. Legal teams notified about the contract revisions. Operations review scheduled for tomorrow at 7 a.m. with agenda items she knew Jax would need to address. Every action was professional, justified, and absolutely designed to prove she wasn't going to back down just because he was intimidating. He couldn't explain why, but danger was closing in. At 6 p.m., when most of the office had cleared out, Caroline knocked on Tess's door. "Mr. Rourke wants to see you before you leave." Tess saved her work and walked into Jax's office. He was standing by the windows, silhouetted against the Manhattan skyline exactly like he'd been during her interview. He didn't turn around when she entered. "The legal team confirmed your analysis on all 3 contracts," Jax said quietly. "The gaps you identified would have cost us millions in delays and potential litigation." "I know. You're either extremely thorough or extremely lucky." "I'm thorough, Mr. Rourke. Luck doesn't factor into contract analysis." This choice would define the rest of his life. Jax finally turned to face her. "You realize that what you did today, correcting me, rearranging my schedule, making decisions without explicit authorization, most employees wouldn't survive that. Most employees wouldn't have caught the errors in the first place," Tess said calmly. "You hired me to be exceptional. That's what I'm delivering." "Exceptional," Jax repeated, something dark and unreadable crossing his expression. "Is that what you call insubordination now?" "I call it doing my job." Tess held his gaze. "If that's a problem, fire me. Otherwise, stop testing me, and let me actually make this company more efficient." The silence stretched between them, heavy and dangerous. Jax's eyes narrowed slightly, his jaw tight, and Tess realized with sudden clarity that she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She'd challenged him. Again. In his own office, at the end of a day where she'd already proven herself indispensable but also insufferably difficult to control. He didn't want revenge, he needed it. "Get out," Jax said quietly. Tess didn't move. "Excuse me? Get out of my office before I say something we'll both regret." His voice was controlled, lethal. "I'll see you tomorrow at 7 a.m. Don't be late." Tess left, her heart pounding, her hands shaking with adrenaline and something else she didn't want to name. As she gathered her things and headed for the elevator, she caught Pierce watching from his office, his expression knowing and slightly concerned. This job was going to destroy her, either because Jax would fire her for being too competent and too stubborn to control, or because working this closely with a man she both respected and resented was going to drive her completely insane. But she'd survive day 1, and tomorrow, she'd survive day 2. Even if it killed her, he had no idea the night would end in blood. The crisis hit on Wednesday at 4 p.m., 36 hours after Tess had correctly predicted that the Singapore deal would implode if they didn't revise the tax structure. The Singapore team had ignored the revision, pushed the contract through anyway, and now the entire deal was 48 hours from regulatory collapse unless someone flew to Singapore immediately to salvage the negotiation. Jax stood in the conference room, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression carved from ice. "I don't care what Lee says about the timeline. Get our legal team on a plane tonight." "No. I'll handle the renegotiation personally, because clearly no one else is competent enough to execute basic contract revision." He disconnected and looked directly at Tess. "Pack a bag. We leave in 3 hours. If people who ignore expertise and create chaos for everyone else make your blood boil like they do mine, hit that subscribe button and join us. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Let's stand together against everyone who refuses to listen until it's too late." Tess blinked. "We? You identified the problem. You're going to help fix it." Jax's tone left no room for argument. "Caroline's booking the flights now. Private jet, direct to Singapore. Wheels up at 7 p.m. I don't have my passport." "Then go get it. You have 2 hours." Jax turned back to his laptop, already pulling up files. "And Tess? Pack for 4 days. This negotiation is going to be brutal." Something didn't add up, and the truth was darker than he expected. Tess made it home, grabbed her passport and enough clothes for a week, and arrived at the private airfield at 6:45 p.m. The jet was smaller than she'd expected, luxury seating for maybe 8 people, but configured for privacy and work rather than comfort. Jax was already on board, laptop open, phone to his ear, conducting what sounded like 3 conversations simultaneously. He gestured toward the seat across from him without looking up. Tess sat, pulled out her own laptop, and started reviewing every piece of documentation related to the Singapore deal. If she was going to survive 4 days trapped on planes and in conference rooms with Jax Rourke, she needed to be so thoroughly prepared that he had no ammunition to criticize her work. They were wheels up at 7:03 p.m. The moment the seatbelt sign turned off, Jax disconnected his call and turned his full attention to Tess. "Walk me through your analysis. Everything you flagged in the original contract." He thought it was over until he noticed something strange. For the next 2 hours, they worked. Tess explained the tax structure gaps, the regulatory exposure, the timing issues that would trigger mandatory review periods. Jax listened with that intense focus that made her uncomfortably aware of how closely he was watching her, not just her analysis, but her body language, her tone, the way she organized her arguments. "You're right," he said finally, which might have been the first time he'd admitted that out loud. Lee's team ignored the flags because they were focused on speed over accuracy. That's going to cost us. Not if we rebuild the structure before the regulatory deadline. Tess pulled up a revised framework she'd been working on. If we separate the holding entities and restructure the payment terms, we can avoid the review trigger entirely. Jax studied her proposal for a long moment, then made 3 rapid changes that tightened the structure even further. We present this tomorrow morning, local time. Lee's not going to like it because it delays his timeline, but he'll accept it because the alternative is losing the deal entirely. He's going to blame me for the delay. Let him. Jax's smile was cold. I'll make it clear the delay is his fault for ignoring your analysis in the first place. But the real question was, who planned it? They worked through dinner, catered food that neither of them really tasted, and into the night. Somewhere over the Pacific, the cabin lights dimmed automatically, and the flight attendant brought blankets and pillows. Jax kept working, his focus absolute, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Tess tried to match his pace, but exhaustion was catching up with her. "Sleep," Jax said without looking up. "We land in 6 hours and the negotiation starts immediately. I need you sharp." "I'm fine. You're falling asleep sitting up." He finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Close the laptop, Tess." "That's not a suggestion." Tess wanted to argue, but her eyes were burning and her brain was starting to fog. She closed the laptop, accepted the blanket from the flight attendant, and reclined her seat. She expected sleep to be impossible, too much adrenaline, too much awareness that Jax was sitting 3 feet away, but exhaustion won. What he didn't know was that someone was watching. She woke to someone shaking her shoulder gently. "Tess, we're descending." Jax's voice, quiet and closer than she expected. She opened her eyes to find him leaning over her seat, his hand still on her shoulder, his face inches from hers. For a moment, neither of them moved. His ice-blue eyes held hers, something shifting in his expression that looked almost like... He pulled back abruptly. 15 minutes to landing. Get ready." The negotiation was exactly as brutal as Jax had predicted. Lee and his team were defensive, hostile, and convinced that Tess's original analysis had been overly cautious. It took 4 hours of line-by-line contract review, increasingly heated arguments about regulatory interpretation, and Jax's cold, controlled dismantling of every objection before Lee finally conceded that the revised structure was necessary. Her next words hit him harder than any bullet. By the time they left the conference room at 11 p.m. local time, Tess was exhausted, furious, and ready to murder Lee personally for the 3 separate times he'd implied she didn't understand international tax law. "You handled that well," Jax said as they walked toward the hotel. "Lee's an ass, but he respects competence. You proved you know the material better than his entire legal team. He called my analysis overly conservative. He was wrong." Jax's voice was flat. "Your analysis saved his deal. He knows it. He just hates admitting it." They reached the hotel, a 5-star property in the financial district, and checked in. The front desk handed them key cards for adjacent suites on the executive floor. Of course they were adjacent, because apparently the universe had decided that Tess didn't need personal space or professional boundaries or any buffer between her and the man who was slowly driving her insane. He should have walked away, but then he saw it. "Get some sleep," Jax said as they stepped into the elevator. "We have another session with Lee at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Another 4 hours of him questioning my competence? Another 4 hours of you proving him wrong." Jax glanced at her. "You're better at this than you think, Tess. Stop doubting yourself and just execute." The elevator doors opened on their floor. Tess headed toward her suite, but Jax's voice stopped her. "Tess." She turned. He was standing in his doorway, his expression serious. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for catching the errors, for pushing back when I didn't want to hear it, for being right even when it was inconvenient." It was the closest thing to genuine appreciation she'd heard from him, and it hit harder than she expected. "You're welcome." For once, he wasn't thinking like a boss, but like a man about to lose everything. She made it into her suite, closed the door, and leaned against it, her heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with exhaustion. Working this closely with Jax was dangerous, not because he was cruel or impossible, But because underneath the hostility and the professional warfare, there was something else. Something that sparked every time they argued, every time their eyes met, every time he said something that revealed he actually respected her even when he hated admitting it. Tess showered, changed into pajamas, and was about to climb into bed when her phone buzzed. Jax, Lee just sent revised contract language. It's wrong. Come to my suite. Tess stared at the message. It was midnight. She was exhausted, and going to Jax's suite in pajamas and wet hair was a terrible idea for approximately 15 different reasons. She went anyway. He realized he wasn't alone, someone else had arrived. Jax opened the door in dark pants and a white t-shirt, his hair slightly disheveled, his expression frustrated. Look at Clause 17. He changed the payment structure without understanding the tax implications. Tess followed him into the suite identical to hers, but somehow more intimidating because it was his space, and looked at the laptop he'd set up on the dining table. He was right. Lee had restructured the payments in a way that triggered exactly the regulatory review they'd been trying to avoid. He's going to blow the whole deal, Tess muttered. Not if we fix it tonight. Jax pulled up a chair. Sit. We're rewriting this before he sends it to his board. They worked side by side for the next 2 hours, rebuilding the payment structure, testing different configurations, arguing over technical details that most people would find mind-numbingly boring, but that Tess found oddly exhilarating. At some point, Jax ordered room service coffee and pastries that appeared at 2 a.m. like magic. At some point, Tess stopped being aware of how close they were sitting, how their shoulders brushed when they both reached for the laptop, how Jax's voice had shifted from cold professionalism to something warmer, more collaborative. This single decision gave him the upper hand again. There, Jax said finally, sitting back. That works. Payment structure is clean, regulatory triggers are avoided, and Lee gets his timeline back. Tess rubbed her eyes. He's going to hate that we revised it without his input. He'll get over it. Jax looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. You should go. Get some sleep before the meeting. What about you? I don't sleep much. His voice was quiet. Hazard of the job. Tess should have left, should have stood up, walked out, maintained the professional distance that was already dangerously thin, but instead, she heard herself say, "Why did you really bring me on this trip?" Hidden in the files was a secret that could destroy them all. Jax was silent for a moment. Because you're the only person in my company competent enough to fix this mess. That's not the whole reason. His jaw tightened. No, it's not. Then what's the rest? Jax stood, creating distance between them. You should go, Tess. You keep saying that. But you also keep pulling me into situations where we're forced to work together. Late nights, private meetings. This trip. Tess stood too, facing him. If you hate me so much, why not just fire me and hire someone easier to control? I don't hate you. You don't like me either. No, Jax agreed, his voice dropping. I don't. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for family. Then what? I'm trying, Jax interrupted, his control finally cracking slightly. To figure out if what I feel when I'm around you is professional respect, or something significantly more dangerous. And until I figure that out, you need to stay the hell out of my suite at 2 a.m. in pajamas, looking like... He stopped himself. Tess's heart was hammering. Looking like what? Like someone I could make a very serious mistake with. Jax's eyes were dark, intense. Go, Tess. Now. Before I do something we'll both regret. Tess left. But as she closed the door to his suite and walked back to her own room, one thing was absolutely clear. The tension between them wasn't professional anymore. It was personal, dangerous, and heading toward a collision neither of them knew how to stop. Everyone thought the deal went smoothly. But they were wrong. They survived Singapore. Barely. The deal closed. Lee grudgingly admitted that Tess's revisions had saved the contract, and they flew back to New York in a silence that crackled with unspoken tension. Jax buried himself in work. Tess did the same. They maintained ruthless professionalism in the office, speaking only about business, avoiding any situation that might recreate the dangerous intimacy of that 2 a.m. conversation in his hotel suite. It lasted exactly 5 days before everything shattered. Tess was reviewing the quarterly financials when her personal phone rang. Unknown number. She normally didn't answer those, but something made her pick up. Tess Gray? The voice was male, smooth, unfamiliar. Who is this? But this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Someone who knows you're carrying $340,000 in medical debt from your mother's cancer treatment. Someone who knows you're 3 months behind on payments. Someone who knows exactly how desperate you are to keep this job. A pause. My name is Cole Bishop, and I think we should talk. Tess's blood went cold. How did you... I make it my business to know vulnerabilities, Miss Gray. Especially when those vulnerabilities belong to people working for Jax Rourke. Cole's voice was pleasant, almost friendly. Don't hang up. I'm not threatening you. I'm offering you an opportunity. I'm not interested. You haven't heard the offer yet. I don't need to. Tess's hand was shaking. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. And then, the gun clicked. Not even if it clears your debt entirely? Not even if it gives you the freedom to walk away from Jax Rourke and his controlled, demanding world? Cole's laugh was soft. Come on, Tess. You're smarter than that. At least hear me out before you make a decision. The answer is no. Then let me make this simple. I need information about Rourke Global's upcoming acquisitions. Specifically, the details of the Moretti deal. You provide that information. I clear your debt. Easy transaction. No one gets hurt. That's corporate espionage. That's business. Cole's tone hardened slightly. And before you self-righteously refuse, consider this. Jax Rourke isn't who you think he is. The legitimate business? That's the surface. Underneath, he's running operations that would make your idealistic little heart break. So don't pretend you're protecting some noble employer. You're protecting a criminal who happens to sign your paychecks. His right-hand man had been hiding something from him. Tess disconnected the call, her hands shaking, her mind racing. She stared at her phone for a long moment, then did the only thing she could think of. She walked into Jax's office without knocking. He looked up, irritation flashing across his face. I'm on a call. Someone just tried to bribe me for information about the Moretti deal. Tess's voice was steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. His name is Cole Bishop. He knows about my debt. He knows I'm desperate. And he implied that you're running criminal operations alongside the legitimate business. Jax's expression went absolutely cold. He said something curt into his phone and disconnected. What exactly did he say? What she said next shattered his trust instantly. Tess repeated the conversation word for word, watching Jax's face harden with every sentence. When she finished, he stood and pulled out his phone, making a call with controlled precision. Marcus. Cole Bishop just made contact with Tess Gray. Personal phone call, approximately 2 minutes ago. I need full surveillance on her discreet but comprehensive. And I need Bishop's current location. A pause. I don't care if it's difficult. Find him. He disconnected and turned back to Tess. Sit down. I don't need to sit. Sit. Down. Jax's voice was lethal. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything, and I'd prefer you not pass out in my office. Tess sat, her heart pounding. Jax moved to the windows, his back to her, his posture rigid. Under the floorboard, he discovered a truth he wasn't ready for. Cole Bishop is a competitor. Not in legitimate business in the other operations I run parallel to Rourke Global. He turned to face her. Operations that include money laundering, strategic acquisitions that aren't entirely legal, and business relationships with people the FBI would very much like to investigate. I'm not just a CEO, Tess. I'm connected to organized crime in ways that would destroy this company if they became public. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Tess's chair. You're what? I'm exactly what Bishop said I am. A criminal who happens to run a legitimate business as cover. Jax's voice was flat, emotionless. The nightclub where we met? That's one of my properties. The security operation my cousin was running? That was tracking a rival who was moving product through my territory without permission. Everything you thought you knew about me. It's partially true and partially very carefully constructed fiction. Tess couldn't breathe. Why are you telling me this? Because Bishop targeting you means he knows you're valuable to me. Which means he's going to keep pushing until either you give him what he wants or I eliminate the threat. Jax's eyes were cold, certain. And I don't let threats against my people go unanswered. But he had no idea a bigger force was controlling everything. I'm not your people. I'm your employee. You're more than that now. Jax moved closer. Whether you want to be or not. Bishop identified you as a pressure point. That makes you a target. And targets in my world don't survive without protection. So what? You're going to assign me bodyguards? Surveillance? Turn my life into a prison because some criminal rival decided I'm a useful pawn? Yes. No hesitation. Starting immediately. Tess stood, fury overriding fear. You don't get to make that choice for me. I just did. Jax's voice was implacable. You can hate me for it. You can quit. You can walk out of this building and never come back. But you will have protection. And you will follow security protocols. And you will not engage with Cole Bishop or anyone associated with him. Clear? This is insane. He trusted her. And that was his biggest mistake. This is survival. Jax stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. Bishop doesn't make empty threats. If he contacted you, it's because he's planning something bigger. And I'm not going to let him use you to get to me. Why? Tess's voice cracked. Why do you even care? You've made it clear I'm just a competent employee. Why risk your operations to protect someone you barely tolerate? Jax was silent for a long moment, something dangerous and unreadable moving through his expression. Then he said quietly, because somewhere in the last 3 weeks you stopped being just an employee, and Bishop figured that out before I was ready to admit it. The admission hung between them, heavy and impossible to ignore. Tess stared at him, seeing past the cold control to something more complicated underneath. He wasn't just protecting an asset. He was protecting someone he cared about, wanted, couldn't afford to lose. What she found in the envelope froze her in place. I need time to think, Tess said finally. You don't have time. Bishop's moving now, which means security starts today. Jax pulled out his phone again. Marcus will brief you on protocols within the hour. You'll have a driver, a security detail, and surveillance on your apartment. Non-negotiable. And if I refuse, then you're fired, and you get the same protection anyway because I'm not letting Bishop use you regardless of whether you work for me. Jax's eyes were hard. Your choice, Tess. Stay and accept protection. Or leave and accept protection. Either way, you're not facing Bishop alone. Tess wanted to argue. Wanted to refuse. Wanted to walk out and prove she didn't need Jax Rourke's dangerous, complicated protection. But Cole Bishop knew about her debt, knew about her desperation, knew exactly which pressure points to exploit. And Jax was right. She didn't have time to figure this out alone. Fine, Tess said. But this doesn't change anything between us professionally. Noted. Jax's expression didn't shift. Marcus will be here in 10 minutes. Don't leave the building without him. Are you Team Tess and Jax? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. This is about to get dangerous. Tess returned to her office, her mind reeling. The man she'd been working for, the man she'd argued with, challenged, grudgingly respected, was connected to organized crime. The job she'd taken to pay off her mother's medical bills was funded by money laundering. And the security she was about to accept meant acknowledging that she was now tangled in a world she'd never wanted to enter. Pierce appeared in her doorway, his expression serious. Marcus just called me. You're getting the full protection package. Apparently. Bishop must have made contact. Pierce sat down without being invited. That means Jax is taking this seriously. Which means you need to take it seriously too. What do you know about Cole Bishop? Enough to know he's dangerous. He runs similar operations to Jax, but he's more violent, more unpredictable. If he's targeting you, it's because he thinks you're a weakness he can exploit. Pierce's voice was quiet. Jax doesn't show weakness often, Tess. The fact that he's protecting you this aggressively means Bishop was right. You matter to him more than just professionally. That's we barely tolerate each other. You think that, Pierce said with a slight smile. But I've watched Jax navigate this world for 5 years. I've seen him ruthless, cold, absolutely controlled. The way he looks at you, that's not control. That's something he's trying very hard not to feel. Before Tess could respond, Marcus appeared, a tall, serious man with the kind of presence that suggested military background and zero tolerance for argument. Miss Gray. Let's talk security protocols. The briefing took an hour. By the end, Tess had a security detail, a new phone with encrypted communications, protocols for entering and leaving her apartment, and the knowledge that her every movement would be monitored for the foreseeable future. Her life had just become a prison designed to keep her safe from a threat she hadn't asked for, orchestrated by a man who'd just admitted she mattered to him in ways neither of them were ready to define. And Cole Bishop, wherever he was undoubtedly watching and planning his next move. The security lasted 3 days before Tess couldn't stand it anymore. 3 days of drivers, bodyguards in her building lobby, and the constant awareness that someone was watching her every move. 3 days of Jax avoiding direct contact, communicating only through terse emails and Marcus's security updates. 3 days of feeling like a prisoner in her own life because a man she barely understood had decided she needed protection she'd never asked for. But what he discovered next changed everything. On Thursday evening, Tess dismissed her security detail against protocol. Marcus would definitely report it and walked into Jax's office at 8 p.m. when the rest of the building had cleared out. He looked up from his laptop, surprise flickering across his face, before cold anger replaced it. Where's Marcus? I sent him home. You don't have the authority to dismiss your security. Watch me. Tess closed the door behind her. We need to talk. Actually talk, not this avoidance strategy you've been running for 3 days. That moment, everything in the room changed. Jax stood slowly, his movements controlled but dangerous. You violated security protocols. Bishop is actively targeting you, and you decided to walk around unprotected because you're what? Frustrated? Bored? Feeling suffocated? All of the above. Tess crossed her arms. You can't just unilaterally decide to control my entire life because some criminal called me once. I'm not your possession, Jax. I'm not something you get to lock away and protect without my input. No, you're something Bishop wants to use against me. That makes you a target whether you accept it or not. Then let me be a target on my own terms. Tess's voice rose. Stop making decisions for me. Stop treating me like I'm too incompetent to understand the danger. And stop avoiding me like I'm some problem you can solve through emails and security protocols. I'm avoiding you, Jax said, his voice dropping to that lethal quiet. Because every time I'm in a room with you, I make decisions that compromise my judgment. And I can't afford compromised judgment when Bishop is actively trying to destroy me. What decisions? One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. Like the one I'm about to make right now if you don't leave my office. Jax moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. Like pulling you into situations I have no business pulling you into. Like wanting things I have absolutely no right to want. Tess's heart was hammering. What things? You're either a threat or you're mine, Tess. Jax's eyes were dark, intense. Which is it? That's not a real choice. It's the only choice that matters in my world. Bishop contacted you because he knows you matter to me. He knows that you're the one variable I can't control. The one person who gets under my skin and makes me second-guess strategies I've used successfully for years. Jax was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from him. So I need to know. Are you going to give him what he wants? Or are you mine to protect? I'm not yours. I'm not anyone's. But Tess's voice shook, betraying the certainty she was trying to project. In that moment, the entire balance of power flipped. Then why are you here? Jax's hand came up, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel it. Why dismiss your security, violate protocols, and corner me in my office if you're not trying to prove something? I'm trying to get answers. You dropped this massive revelation about criminal operations and organized crime and then disappeared behind security briefings and encrypted emails. You don't get to tell me my life is in danger and then refuse to explain why. Why do you think? Jax's control was cracking, his voice rougher. Why do you think Bishop targeted you specifically? Why do you think I'm willing to expose my operations to protect someone who's been in my life for less than a month? I don't know. Because I can't stop thinking about you. The admission came out harsh, almost angry. Because every time you challenge me, every time you prove you're smarter than I want to admit, every time you look at me like I'm someone worth fighting instead of someone worth fearing, I lose a little more control. And Bishop saw that before I was ready to admit it. He knew something that no one else in the building did. Tess stared at him, the words hitting harder than anything he'd said before. Jax, you want answers? Here's the truth. I'm trying to protect you because losing you would compromise everything I've built. Not just professionally, personally. And I hate that. I hate that you've become someone I can't afford to lose. I hate that Bishop knows it. And I hate that I'm standing here telling you this when the smart move would be to fire you and remove the vulnerability entirely. Then why don't you? Tess's voice was barely a whisper. Because I already tried. Jax's hand finally made contact, his fingers brushing her jaw. I spent 3 days trying to convince myself you were just a competent employee, that the protection was purely strategic, that I could hand you off to Marcus's team and go back to running my operations without distraction. His thumb traced her cheekbone. It didn't work. This is a bad idea, Tess said, even as she leaned into his touch. Worst idea I've had in years. But Jax didn't pull away. You should leave, right now, before this becomes something neither of us can take back. What if I don't want to take it back? Hidden in the files was a secret that could destroy them all. Jax's eyes darkened. Then you need to understand what you're agreeing to. My world isn't safe. The people I deal with don't follow rules. And if you're mine, really mine, that means accepting protection you'll hate, restrictions on your freedom, and the knowledge that every enemy I make could use you to hurt me. I'm already in that world, Tess pointed out. Bishop already targeted me. Security is already watching my apartment. My life is already disrupted. At least be honest about why. Why do you think I'm telling you this? Jax's other hand came up, framing her face. Why do you think I'm standing here admitting things I should keep locked down? Because you deserve honesty, even when it's dangerous. especially when it's dangerous. Then be honest about one more thing. Tess's hands came up, gripping his wrists. What do you want from me? Really? Everything, Jack said simply. Your competence, your fire, your absolute refusal to back down even when you should. I want you in my office, in my world, in my bed. I want the right to protect you, without you fighting me on every protocol. He stopped himself. What? He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for family. I want you to trust me enough to let me keep you safe, even when it feels like control. His forehead dropped to rest against hers, because the alternative, Bishop, getting to you, hurting you, using you, that's not something I can survive. Tess closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his admission, the raw honesty beneath the controlled exterior. I have $340,000 in medical debt. My mother's cancer treatment wiped out everything my family had. I took this job because I was desperate, because the salary was the only way I could even begin to pay it down. I hate that I need this job. I hate that I'm dependent on someone else's money to save my family. And I especially hate that the person I'm dependent on is someone who wields power the way you do, absolutely, without apology, without considering what it costs the people caught in your orbit. Jax pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers. That's why you hate me. I don't hate you, I hate needing you. There's a difference. Tess's voice cracked. And now you're telling me I need you even more than I thought, not just for the job, but for protection from threats I didn't even know existed. How am I supposed to accept that without feeling like I'm surrendering every bit of independence I have left? You're not surrendering. You're surviving. Jax's hands were still framing her face, gentle despite the intensity in his voice. And I'm not asking you to need me, Tess. I'm telling you I need you. There's a difference. What do you need me for? This choice would define the rest of his life. To remind me that some things are worth protecting beyond territory and profit. To challenge me when I'm wrong. To be someone I can't control and don't want to. His thumb brushed her lower lip. To be mine in ways that have nothing to do with power and everything to do with choice. Tess's breath caught. That's terrifying. I know. Jax's smile was slight, self-aware. But it's honest. And you wanted honesty. They stood there, inches apart, the air between them charged with everything they'd been avoiding for weeks. Tess could feel her resolve crumbling, her carefully maintained boundaries dissolving under the weight of his admission and the heat of his hands on her skin. If I do this, she said finally, if I accept what you're offering, it's partnership, not ownership. You don't get to make decisions for me without consultation. You don't get to lock me away and call it protection. And you definitely don't get to use my debt as leverage to keep me compliant. Deal. No hesitation. From here on, the rules of the game changed. And you pay off the debt. Jax blinked. What? You heard me. Tess held his gaze. You want me to trust you? You want me to accept protection and restrictions and the danger that comes with being yours? Then eliminate the financial pressure that brought me here in the first place. Pay off the debt. Give me the freedom to choose you because I want to, not because I'm desperate. That's non-negotiable, Tess interrupted. I won't be with someone who holds my family's survival over my head, even unconsciously, even unintentionally. If you want me, Jax, really want me, you clear the debt and give me the choice. Jax stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he pulled out his phone, made a call, and said, Marcus, I need you to wire $340,000 to... He looked at Tess. What's the account? Tess gave him the information, her heart pounding, not quite believing this was happening. Jax relayed the details, confirmed the transfer, and disconnected. Done, he said simply. The debt's cleared. You're free. Tess's eyes filled with unexpected tears. Just like that? Just like that. Jax's hands came back to her face, wiping away the tears with his thumbs. Now choose, Tess. Not because you need the job. Not because you're desperate. Choose me because you want this as much as I do. Her next words hit him harder than any bullet. Tess didn't answer with words. She kissed him instead, closing the distance between them with a fierceness that surprised them both. Jax responded immediately, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her flush against him, kissing her like he'd been restraining himself for weeks, and the dam had finally broken. It was nothing like the controlled, careful man she'd been working with. This was raw, intense, desperate Jax Rourke, without the armor, without the professional distance, without anything between them except honesty and heat and the acknowledgement that they'd been heading toward this collision since the moment they'd met. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jax said, This changes everything. I know. Tess's hands were tangled in his shirt. We're doing it anyway. Yes, Jax agreed. We are. This was only the beginning of a much bigger war. The attack came 48 hours after Tess had chosen Jax, and it was surgical in its precision. Cole Bishop didn't bother with subtlety, he went straight for the pressure point he'd identified, using Tess's newly cleared debt as proof that she was under Jax's protection and therefore vulnerable. Tess was reviewing acquisition documents in her office when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A photo. Her mother, sitting in the hospital waiting room where she went for monthly checkups. The timestamp was from 20 minutes ago. The second text arrived immediately after. She looks healthy. Would be a shame if that changed. He couldn't explain why, but danger was closing in. Tess's blood went cold. She was moving before conscious thought caught up, grabbing her phone and heading for Jax's office. His door was closed, conference call, according to Caroline, but Tess didn't care. She walked in without knocking, interrupting whatever high-level negotiation he was conducting. Jax looked up, irritation flashing across his face until he saw her expression. He said something curt into the phone and disconnected. What happened? Tess showed him the texts. Jax's face went absolutely cold, the kind of cold that promised violence to whoever had made the mistake of threatening someone he'd claimed as his. He made 2 calls in rapid succession, one to Marcus, one to someone Tess didn't recognize, and within minutes, her mother was being relocated to a secure facility with round-the-clock protection. Bishop's escalating, Marcus said when he arrived at the office 15 minutes later. He's moving faster than we anticipated. The photo was taken by a contractor local hire. No direct connection to Bishop's organization. Smart. Hard to trace. I want him found, Jax said, his voice lethal. I want to know where Bishop is operating from, who he's using, and what his next move is. And I want it within 24 hours. Sir, that timeline is non-negotiable. Jax's eyes were ice. He threatened Tess's mother. That crosses a line. Find him. What he didn't know was that someone was watching. After Marcus left, Jax turned to Tess. Your mother is safe. She's being moved to a private facility in Connecticut with full security. You can video call her within the hour. This is my fault. Tess's voice was shaking. If we hadn't. This is Bishop's fault, Jax interrupted firmly. He identified you as a target before we were together. The only thing that's changed is now I have a personal reason to eliminate him permanently, instead of just a professional one. You can't kill someone because they threatened my mother. Watch me. No hesitation. Bishop made a mistake. He thought threatening your family would make you compliant. Instead, he just guaranteed I'm going to dismantle his entire operation piece by piece. The next move came 6 hours later, during a critical board presentation. Tess was presenting the revised Moretti acquisition strategy, the deal that Bishop had originally tried to bribe her for information about when her laptop suddenly displayed a different set of documents. Financial records. Her financial records. The debt that had just been cleared, the wire transfer from Jax's personal account. Every detail of her family's medical expenses laid out for the entire board to see. And suddenly, he realized he was being played. The board members exchanged looks. Whispers started. One of the directors, a man named Harrison, who'd never liked Jax's aggressive expansion strategy, cleared his throat. Mr. Rourke, can you explain why you personally cleared your chief of staff's medical debt? That seems irregular. Jax's expression didn't change, but Tess could see the calculation behind his eyes. This was the real attack. Not the physical threat to her mother, but the professional threat to both of them. Bishop was forcing Jax to either admit their relationship publicly, potentially destabilizing his control of the company, or distance himself from Tess and leave her exposed. Miss Gray's personal finances are none of this board's concern, Jax said calmly. What is your concern is the Moretti acquisition, which she's about to present. I suggest we focus on that. With respect, Harrison pushed. A 6-figure personal payment to an employee raises questions about appropriate boundaries and potential conflicts of interest. The board has a right to vote on acquisitions, Jax interrupted, his voice going cold. Not to interrogate my personal financial decisions. Miss Gray, continue the presentation. For the first time, he wasn't in control. But the damage was done. The board was distracted, suspicious, focused on the relationship between Jax and Tess rather than the deal. The presentation limped to completion, but Tess could feel the shift in the room, the judgment, the assumption that she'd slept her way into Jax's favor, that her competence was secondary to their personal involvement. After the board filed out, Harrison lingered. This is a problem, Jax. You can't be personally involved with your chief of staff and expect the board to take her recommendations seriously. Her recommendations are based on data, not personal favors. But the optics are being manipulated by someone who hacked our systems to expose private financial information during a board meeting. Jax's voice was lethal. I suggest you focus on that security breach rather than Miss Gray's qualifications. Harrison left, but the threat was clear. The board was now questioning Tess's credibility, which meant questioning Jax's judgment. Bishop had successfully created professional chaos without firing a single shot. But there was one thing he didn't know about his closest ally. Tess found Jax in his office an hour later, staring at his laptop with an expression that promised someone was about to have a very bad day. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Don't apologize for something Bishop orchestrated." Jax didn't look up. "He's playing a smart game. Threaten your mother to create fear, expose our relationship to create professional instability, and force me to choose between protecting you and maintaining control of my company. What are you going to do?" "Eliminate him." Jax finally looked at her. "But first, I need you to do something for me." "What?" "The Moretti deal. Bishop wants information about it, which means there's something in that acquisition he's trying to block or exploit. I need you to find out what." Jax pulled up a file. "Go through every piece of documentation, every financial record, every asset list, every subsidiary. Find what Bishop wants." Under the floorboard, he discovered a truth he wasn't ready for. Tess spent the next 6 hours doing exactly that, pulling apart the Moretti deal with the kind of detailed analysis that had made her valuable to Jax in the first place. And at 11 p.m., she found it. Buried in a subsidiary's asset list was a property in New Jersey, a warehouse that, according to cross-referenced shipping records, was being used for operations that weren't listed in Moretti's official business filings. "It's a smuggling operation," Tess said when she brought the information to Jax. "Moretti's running pharmaceuticals through that warehouse. And based on the timing, Bishop's been using the same route for his own operations. If you acquire Moretti, you take over the warehouse and cut off Bishop's distribution network." Jax studied the documentation, his expression shifting from cold anger to something more calculated. "That's why he's escalating. The Moretti deal doesn't just expand my territory, it destroys his supply chain." "So what do? "We close the Moretti deal, immediately." Jax pulled out his phone. "And we use the warehouse to trap Bishop. He wants information about the acquisition? We give it to him. But we control what he sees. You want to use the deal as bait. I want to use his desperation against him." Jax's smile was cold. "He threatened your mother. He tried to destroy your credibility. He made this personal. Now I'm going to show him what happens when you make things personal with me." He trusted her, and that was his biggest mistake. The plan was risky, complicated, and absolutely the kind of strategic manipulation that Tess should have found morally questionable. But Bishop had threatened her mother, had exposed her most vulnerable financial moment to a boardroom full of judgment, had tried to destroy everything she'd built with Jax. "Tell me what you need from me," Tess said. Jax's eyes met hers, something fierce and possessive moving through his expression. "I need you to trust me, completely. Even when you don't understand the moves I'm making. I trust you, even knowing what I'm capable of. Especially knowing what you're capable of." Tess moved closer. "Bishop threatened my family. He tried to destroy us professionally. Whatever you're planning, I'm in." Jax pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "This is going to get dangerous. Bishop's going to retaliate when he realizes we're setting a trap. Then we'd better make sure the trap works." Tess looked up at him. "And Jax, when this is over, we're having a conversation about exactly what eliminating Bishop means. Because I need to know where the line is." "Deal," Jax agreed. "But first, we end this threat, together." Everyone thought the deal went smoothly, but they were wrong. The trap snapped shut 72 hours later, and it was brutal in its efficiency. Jax had leaked false information about the Moretti warehouse to 3 different intermediaries, each version slightly different, each designed to identify which route Bishop was using for intelligence. When Bishop's people moved on the warehouse attempting to sabotage the shipment before the acquisition closed, Marcus's team was waiting. 4 of Bishop's contractors were arrested, 2 more fled, and the evidence Marcus recovered from their surveillance equipment gave Jax exactly what he needed: proof that Cole Bishop was running operations through Moretti's distribution network without authorization, which meant Bishop had just handed Jax leverage with the FBI and with Moretti's organization. But Bishop himself remained elusive. He'd sent his people into the trap without exposing himself, which meant he was still out there, still dangerous, and according to Marcus, still focused on Tess as his primary pressure point. He realized he wasn't alone, someone else had arrived. He's going to come for her directly, Marcus said during the emergency briefing in Jax's office. He's lost his distribution network, lost his leverage with Moretti, and lost 4 contractors. He's desperate, which makes him unpredictable. Then we keep Tess secured until Bishop makes his move. Jax's voice was flat, controlled. Full lockdown. She doesn't leave the building without me or you personally. I'm right here, Tess interjected. And I'm not spending the next week locked in your office while Bishop plans his next attack. You're spending however long it takes until he's neutralized. Jax turned to face her. This isn't negotiable, Tess. Bishop is unstable and focused on you. I'm not giving him the opportunity. So what? I just hide until you decide it's safe? Yes, no hesitation. That's exactly what you do. One wrong move, and everything would fall apart. They argued for another 20 minutes before Marcus diplomatically suggested that perhaps Tess could work from the secure apartment. Jax maintained in the building an executive suite on the top floor that served as both office and living space for extended work sessions. It was a compromise that satisfied no one, but at least got Tess out of Jax's direct line of sight before one of them said something they couldn't take back. Tess was reviewing files in the apartment, trying to focus on actual work instead of the fact that she was basically under house arrest when the building's fire alarm activated. She looked up, confused. Fire drills weren't scheduled, and Marcus's team would have warned her if this was a security test. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, stay in the apartment. Lock the door. This is not a drill. Tess locked the door, her heart pounding. Through the windows, she could see smoke, actual smoke rising from somewhere below. The fire alarm continued, its piercing wail, and then her phone rang, unknown number. She answered without thinking. Hello? What followed next was completely unexpected. Tess Gray. Cole Bishop's voice was smooth, pleasant, absolutely chilling. I'm impressed. You're smarter than Jax gave you credit for. The Moretti trap was elegant. Where are you? Close enough to be a problem, far enough to be safe. Bishop's laugh was soft. The fire is a distraction. Small, controlled. Nothing that will actually hurt anyone. But it will pull Jax's security away from you for exactly 7 minutes. Which is how long I need to make you understand something very important. I'm not interested in... Your mother is safe. I'm pulling my surveillance. The professional attacks stop as of right now. Bishop's tone shifted, becoming almost respectful. You won, Tess. You and Jax dismantled my distribution network, cost me millions, and proved you're not someone I can coerce or manipulate. I respect that. Then why are you calling? But the real question was, who planned it? To deliver a warning, not a threat, a warning. Bishop paused. Jax Rourke is going to protect you, absolutely. He's going to use every resource he has to keep you safe. But protection from someone like him comes with a price. You'll never be truly free again. Every decision you make will be filtered through his security protocols. Every relationship will be vetted. Every risk will be eliminated before you even know it exists. Is that the life you want? That's not your concern. No, but it's your future, and you should go into it with eyes open. Bishop's voice was quiet. I'm out, Tess. You're safe from me. But ask yourself, are you safe from him? Or have you just traded one kind of prison for another? The call disconnected. Tess stared at her phone, Bishop's words echoing in her mind. Before she could process what had just happened, the apartment door slammed open. Jack stood in the doorway, his expression absolutely feral, Marcus right behind him. And then, the gun clicked. Are you hurt? Jax's voice was rough, urgent. Did Bishop? I'm fine, he called. But he's pulling back, he said. Tess stopped, seeing the wild look in Jax's eyes, the barely controlled violence in his posture. Jax, I'm fine. Jax crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When the fire alarm went off and Marcus said Bishop was active in the area, I thought... He stopped himself. I thought I was too late. You're not. Tess wrapped her arms around him. I'm okay. We're okay. Jax pulled back enough to frame her face with his hands, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that stole her breath. You can argue with me for the rest of our lives, Tess. You can challenge every decision I make. Fight me on every protocol, and tell me I'm wrong about absolutely everything. But you will not ever fight my enemies alone. Do you understand? You don't face threats without me. You don't take calls from people like Bishop without backup. You don't. His voice cracked slightly. You don't make me live in a world where I could lose you. Her next words hit him harder than any bullet. Jax, I love you. The admission came out harsh, raw, nothing like the controlled man she'd been working with. I love your fire, your competence, Your absolute refusal to back down even when you should. I love that you challenge me, that you make me better, that you see past the violence to something worth protecting. And I am terrified, genuinely terrified, that the world I've built is going to destroy you. Tess's eyes filled with tears. I'm not that easy to destroy. I know. That's what scares me most. Jax's forehead dropped to rest against hers. Because you're strong enough to survive my world, which means you might choose to stay in it. And I don't know if I can live with myself if that choice costs you everything you are. Then let me make that choice. Tess's hands came up to cover his. Stop protecting me from decisions and start trusting me to make them. Bishop was right about one thing: your protection comes with restrictions. But he was wrong about the prison. I'm not trapped by your security, Jax. I'm protected by someone who values me enough to eliminate threats I didn't even know existed. This choice would define the rest of his life. That's exactly what it is, Tess interrupted. And yes, it's controlling. Yes, it limits my freedom. Yes. It's the kind of relationship that would make my college feminism professor have an aneurysm. But it's also honest. And fierce. And built on the understanding that we're stronger together than apart. So stop apologizing for protecting me and just... She kissed him, hard and desperate. Just love me. However that looks in your world. Jax kissed her back with a desperation that matched her own. His hands tangling in her hair. His body pressing hers against the wall. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he said, I cleared your debt to give you freedom. But what I want, what I need, is for you to choose me anyway. Not because you're trapped, but because you want this life even knowing what it costs. I choose you, Tess said firmly. I choose your impossible security protocols and your criminal connections and your terrifying ability to dismantle threats before breakfast. I choose all of it, Jax. Because the alternative, a safe, controlled life without you, that's not freedom, that's just empty. You're sure, completely sure. Tess smiled slightly. Now tell me what actually happened with Bishop. Because that fire alarm wasn't random. From here on, the rules of the game changed. Jax's expression hardened. Bishop set it as cover to confirm you were in the building. Marcus's team tracked him to a surveillance point across the street. He's gone now, disappeared before we could apprehend him. But he left a message with his contractors. He's pulling back from our territory, ceasing operations against Rourke Global, and acknowledging that you're under my permanent protection. So we won. We survived, Jax corrected. There's a difference. Bishop's still out there. He could change his mind tomorrow. But for now, yes, you're safe. And my mother? Protected indefinitely. I've set up a trust to cover her medical care for the rest of her life. She'll never be a pressure point again. Jax's hand brushed her cheek. You're free, Tess. Financially, professionally, personally. No debt, no leverage, no vulnerabilities Bishop or anyone else can exploit. Except you. Except me, Jax agreed quietly. But I'm not going to exploit you. I'm going to protect you, partner with you. And if you let me love you for however long you'll have me. That sounds like forever. It is forever. Jax pulled her close again. Because I don't do temporary. And I definitely don't let go of people who save my sanity while simultaneously driving me insane. Tess laughed, the sound slightly watery. We're doing this? Really doing this? Really doing this, Jax confirmed. Messy, complicated, occasionally dangerous, absolutely committed partnership. Think you can handle it? I think, Tess said, looking up at the man who'd become her employer, her protector, and now something infinitely more important. I can handle anything if you're standing next to me. Good, Jax said, because I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you. This was only the beginning of a much bigger war. The board meeting happened 3 days later, and it was exactly as uncomfortable as Tess had anticipated. Harrison and 2 other directors had requested a formal discussion about executive conduct and appropriate boundaries, which was corporate speak for interrogating Jax about his relationship with his chief of staff. Jax sat at the head of the conference table, his expression neutral, his posture relaxed. Tess sat 2 seats down, close enough to show solidarity, far enough to maintain some professional distance. She'd wanted to skip the meeting entirely, but Jax had insisted. We're not hiding. We're establishing terms. Harrison cleared his throat. Jax, the board appreciates your leadership and the company's strong performance this quarter. However, we have concerns about the optics of your personal relationship with Miss Gray. Given the financial assistance you provided and the proximity of your working relationship, we feel it's appropriate to discuss potential conflicts of interest. Discuss, Jax invited, his voice calm. In that moment, the entire balance of power flipped. We'd like to suggest that Miss Gray transition to a different role within the company, perhaps heading up a regional office, or taking a strategic position that doesn't require daily, direct collaboration with you. No. Jax's response was flat, absolute. Harrison blinked. I'm sorry? No, Jax repeated. Miss Gray is the most competent chief of staff this company has ever had. Her analysis saved the Singapore deal, identified critical vulnerabilities in the Moretti acquisition, and streamlined operations that were bleeding money for 2 years. You want to relocate her because of optics? That's not strategic. That's cowardice disguised as propriety. With respect, the appearance of impropriety is less important than actual results, Jax interrupted. And Tess's results speak for themselves. If this board is more concerned with how my personal life looks than how my company performs, perhaps we need to reconsider board composition rather than executive staffing. That moment, everything in the room changed. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Harrison exchanged looks with the other directors, clearly not expecting Jax to challenge them so directly. We're not questioning Miss Gray's competence, another director, a woman named Patricia, said carefully. We're questioning whether the personal relationship creates an environment where her recommendations receive undue weight or where other employees feel their contributions are undervalued. That's a valid concern, Tess said, speaking for the first time. All eyes turned to her. Which is why I'd like to propose a structure that addresses it. Jax's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded for her to continue. This single decision gave him the upper hand again. I recommend implementing a peer review system for all major strategic recommendations I make, Tess said. Any analysis that significantly impacts company direction gets reviewed by at least 2 other senior executives before it reaches the board. That way, my work is validated by people who have no personal investment in supporting me. If my recommendations still hold up after peer scrutiny, then you know they're based on competence rather than favoritism. Patricia leaned forward, interested. That's actually reasonable. It's also what should have been in place already, Tess continued. No single executive, regardless of their relationship with the CEO, should have unchecked influence over major decisions. This system protects the company, protects me professionally, and addresses your concerns about conflicts of interest. Harrison was quiet for a moment, clearly trying to find a flaw in the logic. And the personal relationship? How do you address the optics of that? For the first time, he wasn't in control. By being honest about it, Jack said. Tess and I are together, personally, permanently, and with full acknowledgement that we're building a life outside this company. But our professional collaboration is based on the same standards that govern every other executive relationship in this building: results, accountability, and measurable performance. If Tess's work doesn't meet those standards, she's held accountable. If it does meet those standards, her personal involvement with me is irrelevant. That's a risky position, Harrison said. Everything I do is risky, Jax countered. But calculated risk is how this company grew from regional operations to global presence. I'm not going to undermine that strategy, because some board members are uncomfortable with the fact that I'm in love with someone who also happens to be exceptional at her job. The bluntness of the statement, "in love with," hung in the air. Tess felt her face flush, but she held her expression steady. This was the moment they'd been building toward: public acknowledgement, professional boundaries, and the understanding that their relationship existed both inside and outside the corporate structure. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for family. Patricia looked at Tess. And you're comfortable with this arrangement? The scrutiny? The peer review system? The constant awareness that people will question your work? No, Tess said honestly. I'm not comfortable with it, but I'm committed to it. Because the alternative, hiding our relationship, pretending it doesn't exist, or leaving a job I'm genuinely good at, that's not acceptable to me. I'd rather face scrutiny and prove my competence repeatedly than run from something that matters. Harrison sighed. All right. We'll implement the peer review system on a trial basis. But Jax, understand, if this becomes a liability, if the relationship impacts company performance or creates a toxic work environment, the board will revisit this conversation. Understood, Jax said. Anything else? The meeting wrapped up with tense professionalism. After the board filed out, Tess and Jax remained in the conference room, the silence heavy. What followed next was completely unexpected. That was intense, Tess said finally. That was necessary. Jax stood, moving to where she sat. You handled it perfectly. The peer review system was brilliant. It addresses their concerns while actually improving our operational structure. I meant what I said, about facing scrutiny. I know you did. Jax pulled her to her feet. but I'm not going to let them turn you into a problem to be managed. You're my partner, Tess, in business, in life, in everything. And anyone who can't accept that can find employment elsewhere. That's a very him or me ultimatum to give your board. It's the only ultimatum that matters. Jax's hands framed her face. I'm not negotiating our relationship. I'm not hiding it. And I'm definitely not letting anyone, board members, rivals, employees, make you feel like you don't belong in this company or in my life. This choice would define the rest of his life. Tess smiled, feeling the weight of his commitment, the absolute certainty in his voice. You know I'm going to challenge you constantly, right? Just because we're together doesn't mean I'm going to automatically agree with your strategies. I'm counting on it. Jax kissed her forehead. I don't want agreement, Tess. I want partnership. The kind where you push back when I'm wrong, where you make me defend my decisions, where you refuse to let me get lazy just because I'm in charge. And when I'm wrong, then I push back just as hard. His smile was slight but genuine. That's what partners do. They make each other better, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Jax pulled her closer. I don't need comfortable, Tess. I need someone strong enough to stand next to me and call me out when I'm making mistakes. That's you. That's always been you. Tess wrapped her arms around him, breathing in his scent, feeling the steady beat of his heart. I love you, you know. Even when you're impossible and controlling and absolutely infuriating. I love you too, Jax said quietly. Especially when you're impossible and challenging and absolutely infuriating. They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the empty conference room. Two people who'd fought their way from hostile argument to dangerous attraction to something that looked remarkably like forever. What now? Tess asked. Now we build the rest of our lives, Jax said simply. Together. With all the complications and challenges and absolute certainty that we chose this. Sounds perfect. Sounds like us, Jax corrected, and kissed her like he had all the time in the world to prove exactly how permanent this partnership was going to be. Everyone thought the deal went smoothly, but they were wrong. 6 months later, Tess walked into Rourke Global at 7:30 a.m., her security detail trailing discreetly behind her. She'd gotten used to Marcus's team, had learned their names, their schedules, and exactly how much space they'd give her before intervening. It was still restrictive, still occasionally frustrating, but it was also the reality of building a life with someone whose world came with bodyguards and encrypted communications. The office had changed in subtle ways since she and Jax had gone public with their relationship. Some employees were more careful around her, clearly aware that criticizing the chief of staff meant potentially angering the CEO. Others had relaxed, treating her as a partner rather than just an executive. Pierce had become a close friend, offering advice on navigating the complicated dynamics of being both Jax's professional partner and his personal one. But what he discovered next changed everything. Morning, Tess, Caroline said as Tess passed the executive assistant's desk. Jax is already in his office. He said to tell you the Milan team is calling in 20 minutes for final approval on the expansion. Tell him I'll be there in 15. Tess dropped her bag in her office and pulled up the Milan files. The expansion was massive. 3 new facilities, 200 jobs, and a partnership with a logistics company that would revolutionize their European operations. She'd been working on the deal for 4 months, and the peer review system the board had mandated meant that 3 other executives had already validated her analysis. It was working. The system, the scrutiny, the constant awareness that her work would be examined more closely than anyone else's. It was actually making her sharper, more thorough, more confident in her recommendations. Jax appeared in her doorway, coffee in hand. Ready for Milan? Always. Tess accepted the coffee cream. No sugar. Exactly how she liked it. How was your morning? From here on, the rules of the game changed. Productive. Marcus confirmed Bishop still operating in the Midwest. No movement toward our territory. Your mother's medical team reported excellent progress on her latest treatment, and I managed to convince Harrison that our acquisition strategy isn't reckless expansion, it's calculated growth. So basically a normal Tuesday. Basically, Jax leaned against the doorframe, his eyes warm. You look beautiful. By the way, you say that every morning. It's true every morning. He glanced at his watch. We have 12 minutes before the call. Anything you need to brief me on? Just that the logistics partnership is going to face union resistance in Milan. We should plan for negotiations rather than assuming immediate acceptance. Noted. Anything else? He knew something that no one else in the building did. Yeah, Tess stood, moving closer. I'm meeting Elle for dinner tonight. She wants details about the charity gala next month. Jax's expression shifted slightly. Marcus will coordinate security. I know. But I wanted to tell you directly. Tess's hand rested on his chest. Partnership, remember? I tell you my plans. You don't lock me down without consultation. Deal. Jax covered her hand with his. Though I reserve the right to assign extra security if Elle decides dinner should turn into nightclub hopping. She's engaged now. The nightclub days are behind her. That's what everyone says before they end up at a club at 2 a.m. But Jax was smiling. Fine. Dinner with Elle. Reasonable security. Home by 11. Midnight, Tess countered. 11:30. Deal. She kissed him quickly. Now let's go convince Milan that we're not corporate overlords, just strategic partners who want to build something sustainable. This single decision gave him the upper hand again. The call went smoothly. The Milan team had concerns, valid ones about labor practices and cultural integration, but Tess's analysis had anticipated most of them. By the end of the hour, they had preliminary approval and a timeline for final negotiations. After the call, Jax pulled Tess into his office and closed the door. You handled that perfectly. The union concerns, the cultural sensitivity, you read that room better than I could have. That's why we're partners. Tess sat on the edge of his desk. You handle the aggressive expansion strategy. I handle the relationship building. Is that what we're calling it? Jax moved to stand between her knees. You make me look less like a corporate raider and more like someone who actually cares about people? Exactly. Tess's arms looped around his neck. It's a valuable skill. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for family. It's one of many valuable skills. Jax's hand settled on her waist. Have I mentioned recently that hiring you was the best decision I've ever made? You mention it approximately 3 times a week. Then I'm due for a 4th. He kissed her, slow and deliberate. Best decision. Even counting the nightclub argument, the professional warfare, and the part where a rival tried to use you as leverage. Especially counting those parts, Tess said, because they got us here. Here was good. Here was Tess walking into work every day knowing she was valued for her competence, not just her relationship. Here was Jax trusting her enough to let her build her own professional identity while still being fiercely protective. Here was a partnership that balanced power and vulnerability, control and freedom, professional boundaries and personal intimacy. What he didn't know was that someone was watching. Pierce knocked on the glass wall, his expression amused. Sorry to interrupt, but the PR team needs approval on the charity gala invitations. Apparently, there's a question about whether Tess should be listed as chief of staff or partner. Both, Jax said without hesitation. She's both. That's going to raise questions. Let it. Jax's arm tightened around Tess's waist. We're not hiding who we are anymore. If people want to question it, they can take it up with me directly. After Pierce left, Tess looked at Jax. You know that's going to generate media attention. CEO and chief of staff. Officially couple, it'll be entertainment news for a week. For once, he wasn't thinking like a boss, but like a man about to lose everything. Good. Then maybe people will stop speculating and just accept that we're together. Jax's voice was firm. I'm done pretending our relationship is something to be managed or hidden. You're my partner, in every sense that matters, and I want the world to know it. Even if it complicates things professionally, especially then. Jax pulled her closer. Because the complication, the scrutiny, the questions, the constant awareness that people are watching, that's the price we pay for choosing each other. And it's worth it, every time. Tess kissed him, feeling the absolute certainty in his words. The commitment that went deeper than corporate strategy or professional ambition. They'd built something fierce and permanent from the wreckage of their initial hostility. Something that survived external threats and internal doubts. The intercom buzzed. Caroline's voice. Jax, the 10 a.m. acquisition team is ready. Be right there. Jax released Tess reluctantly. Duty calls. Always does. Tess slid off the desk. I'll finalize the Milan documentation and send it to the peer review team. See you at lunch? See you at lunch, Tess confirmed. This choice would define the rest of his life. As she walked back to her office, Tess caught her reflection in the glass wall. Chief of staff, partner, woman who'd argued with a stranger in a nightclub and somehow ended up building a life with him. The journey had been chaotic, dangerous, occasionally terrifying, but it had also been honest, fierce, and absolutely worth every complicated moment. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jax. I love you. Even when you're being impossible about security protocols. Tess smiled and typed back. I love you too. Even when you're being controlling about dinner curfews. Jax, 11:30 is not a curfew. It's a reasonable expectation. Tess, we'll revisit that argument tonight. Jax, Looking forward to it. Tess set her phone down and pulled up the Milan files, her smile lingering. This was her life now. High-stakes acquisitions, strategic negotiations, and loving someone who challenged her as fiercely as she challenged him. It wasn't simple. It wasn't safe. But it was real, and chosen, and built on the absolute certainty that they were stronger together than apart. He had no idea the night would end in blood. The nightclub argument felt like a lifetime ago. The terrified woman who'd confronted a stranger over spilled drinks had transformed into someone who could stand next to a powerful man and claim her own power without apology. And Jax Rourke, the impossible, controlling, fiercely protective man she'd once thought she'd never see again, had become her partner in every sense that mattered. That was worth more than safety, more than simplicity, more than any life she could have built without him. That was everything. If this story touched your heart, please share in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that help sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. Your support keeps these stories